Is this really all right? Frianne looked down at the volumes of her treatise placed in front of her. Due to its prodigious length, Frianne had invested a sizable portion of her incomes, derived from the domain allocated to her by her family and her salary as an aide to the court council, into publishing fundamental principles of magocratic governance. One did not usually attempt to distribute such works, so she had little expectation of it selling very many copies, but it still hurt just a bit whenever she thought about just how little interest there was in what she considered the foundation of her magnum opus. Aside from those who purchased a copy as a courtesy who she was not sure read it at all, there were a few questions posed to her by some members of the Imperial Ministry of Magic about several of the applications proposed. With this being the case, she had dug in to fight the long battle to make her ideas a reality. Little did she know that her ideas had somehow trickled over the border to the Sorcerer's Kingdom. I can't help but be curious over how my work reached members of the Sorcerer's Kingdom's aristocracy, Frianne said. Countess Wagner pushed out her lips in thought. It was back at the thing in the spring, wasn't it? I believe so, Baroness Garnier nodded. The Imperial Ministry of Magic set up that big pavilion in the main plaza. Ah yeah, that's right, Lady Wagner said. Let's see, it essentially became required reading for the entire House of Lords once we found out that His Majesty had read it. Curiosity turned to dread in an instant. What did that mean? What would happen to her? Her cousin always mentioned the unfathomable intellect of the Sorcerer King. His Majesty the Sorcerer King read fundamental principles of magocratic governance. That's what I said. Do you know what he thought about it? That would probably be a question better answered in person, Countess Wagner told her. Oops, I guess I drove up the value of that signature. How about this? Another book was placed in front of her. Frianne had all of 2 seconds to register what it was before Dimmeear snatched it off of the table in a blink. This is... Dimmeear held up the book in front of her in wide-eyed disbelief. The title Dreams of Red 3 was debossed upon its crimson cover. Dimmeear flipped the volume open to its first page. It's real? Her eyes hungrily scanned the text. It is. Prez, it's real. Dreams of Red was a novel series that had appeared in the circles of imperial nobility early in the spring. Not only had it become highly popular with many noblewomen, but the story was starting to take the entire empire by storm. There was much discussion and debate over who the best characters were and what elements of the story stood out the most, and it was becoming widely accepted as a broad, literary masterpiece. No one even hid the fact that they were readers anymore. It was strange to not be one. Forebodingly, at the end of the second book, was a note by the author about how the next might be delayed due to their personal circumstances. Since it had ended at a rather exciting point, fans could only wait with a sense of dread over whether they would ever see the next volume. The Sorcerer's Kingdom really is the Sorcerer's Kingdom, Dimmeear's voice was awestruck. They can even get the third book of Dreams of Red from the future. A lot of people have tried to find the Dreamer, but they don't seem to be from the Empire. This was also true. More than a few wealthy individuals had turned the circles of bards and sages in every city inside out in an attempt to locate the author of Dreams of Red to no avail. So you're a big fan, huh? Countess Wagner asked. Of course, Dimmeear exclaimed excitedly, I don't know anyone that isn't a fan, even my parents read it. Really now? Who do people support in the Empire? Clarence and Ludwig is the most popular pairing, Dimmeear said. I'm a bit of a rebel though. Ludwig and Veronica is more my thing. I especially love how brave Veronica is despite her fears. Ludwig is always there for her when she needs him, yet he doesn't try to keep her caged. Personally, Frianne preferred Clarence and Ludwig, but she was admittedly more conventional in her tastes. There were other characters as well, but the series hadn't contained any major plots that featured them yet. What about individual characters? The martial nobles are all about Ludwig, of course, Dimmeear replied. Julian is a favorite amongst both men and women working in the cities. How he just pushes the world forward from behind the scenes is really inspiring. He's almost like a role model for us. Julian is no doubt impressive, Frianne said, but I think Rin's work is just as important. I truly hope she gets more attention soon. That's so. Countess Wagner looked over them appraisingly. Well, since you two seem to be big fans, I'll let you read my copy while we're here. Since you're signing our copies of Fundamental Principles of Magocratic Governance, I'll even throw in 2 autographed copies of Dreams of Red 3 when it's finally released. Frianne flipped open the tome in front of her and signed it. She reached out to sign Countess Corlin's copy as well. Baroness Gonnier produced one of her own. "You're not getting yours signed, Zaradnik." Countess Wagner grinned. After a long look at Countess Wagner, Baroness Zaradnik sighed and produced a copy of her own. "Finding the dreamer is quite the feat," Frianne said. "How did you ever manage it? You're not the dreamer, are you?" "Nah, I've just known him since I was a kid." "You mean that the dreamer lives in the Sorceress Kingdom?" "Yep. Dreams of Red is our most popular export right now, I guess. Weird how this sells like crazy and everything else gets the stink eye." They settled back down again and their carriage resumed its tour of the first-class district. The day had been slated for the residential areas, with future visits to the Imperial Ministry of Magic and the Imperial Magic Academy. Most visiting dignitaries usually marveled at the sights of the Imperial Center, but the nobles from the Sorceress Kingdom seemed more interested in asking Frianne about the Empire and its inner workings. How have the politics of the Empire changed in light of its relationship with the Sorceress Kingdom? Countess Corlin asked. "Even to us it was quite abrupt." "Everyone was shocked," Frianne answered. "I hadn't joined the court council at that point, but from what I hear, His Imperial Majesty simply showed up and declared our status as a client state without any forewarning. The entire first-class district became paralyzed at the news." "That is understandable," Countess Corlin nodded slightly. "What of opposition to the Emperor's declaration?" "I can't imagine that everyone simply smiled and nodded after digesting the information. The temples of the Four have been stubbornly promoting resistance to every aspect of the Sorceress Kingdom's influence that they think they can get away with without reprisal." "Would there be reprisal if something happened?" Countess Corlin lifted a cup of fragrant red tea to her lips. She remained silent for several moments after taking a long sip. "Our foreign policy is not unlike what you might find in the other nations of the region. The Sorceress Kingdom may have a generally benign stance towards its neighbors, but it should not be a surprise if we take issue when anything of ours is subjected to unreasonable treatment. Of course, we understand that cultural reactions are not so easily amended. Everything that is going on with the citizenry is well within expectations. My question was in regards to those with the power to effect change. The imperial administration should have long reached its limit when it comes to enacting forceful measures against the aristocracy, yes?" Once again, Countess Corlin demonstrated a willingness to cut straight to the heart of the matter. Most members of the nobility, even those newly raised through service in the imperial administration, tended to dance around a major issue for a bit before gaining the confidence to tackle it. She was a woman well accustomed to wielding power, understanding exactly how her talent, resources, and influence were best employed. Even potential adversaries were turned into weapons to wield at her discretion. "It is as you say, Lady Corlin," Frianne replied. "Early in the Emperor's reign, there was plenty of excess that we could afford to trim away. At a certain point, however, the pace of our reforms had to slow down. Things are not so bad now, however, as nearly all of the problematic administrators have been dismissed from their positions. Raising a new generation of administrators takes, well, a generation. Having mediocre administrators maintain the status quo is better than the lands falling into chaos." At this point, Lady Zaradnik said, "Should the imperial administration be so eager to replace them?" "I would think this is also to the Sorceress Kingdom's advantage," Frianne replied. "Should the Empire not strive for excellence?" "The excellence that you strive for is unreliable," Lady Zaradnik told her. "Even an excellent family can produce mediocre scions. It does not diminish the value of their lineage. The Sorceress Kingdom is a nation ruled by immortal beings. Their perspective extends beyond mortal time frames. The shortfalls of single generations are easily managed, but the loss of a bloodline represents the loss of every contribution that its members may offer in the future. This one worships the Six." Baroness Zaradnik's accent already gave rise to this suspicion, but the way she constructed her case clearly expressed her beliefs. Followers of the Six Great Gods were extraordinarily rare in the Baharuth Empire, and Frianne had never interacted with anyone from the slain theocracy or other lands that followed them. As far as the Empire was concerned, the tenets of their religion were quaint and their views superstitious. Their military power and level of advancement, however, was undeniable. A part of her wondered why any religion was allowed to exist in a nation ruled by an undead sovereign, but it didn't change the fact that even more so than the theocracy, the Sorceress Kingdom was not to be offended. The Sorceress Kingdom may have this luxury, Frian said, but it is one that regular nations such as ours cannot afford. Reastis is a prime example of what happens when a nation does not regularly perform housekeeping. So you're saying that, even after all of the Empire's reforms, the issues of the past continued to manifest themselves? Frian winced internally. They had done it again. She did not believe herself to be ill-equipped to serve as a representative of the court council or the imperial dynasty, but it felt like her inexperience was showing. No, inexperience aside, these nobles seemed to be far too experienced for nobles from minor houses of an age with her. The worst part was how they seamlessly worked off of one another to achieve their desired results. Corlin appeared to be a masterful ringleader. Zaradnik was the inciter, easily knocking others off balance and creating openings for the others to exploit. Wagner always seemed relaxed and affable, yet she still served as Zaradnik's opposite number, tempting them into pitfalls with illusions of reprieve and various distractions. For the time being, Gonye seemed nothing more than a fluffy ball of comforting warmth, which terrified Frian as to what role she might actually play. She had told Demir that Corlin was probably a match for any of the dukes, but together these nobles might even be able to stand their ground against the emperor. Rather than referring to them as issues of the past, Frian said, "It is what it means to be human, yes? The qualities that bring forth these problems stem from a nature common to us all. Constant vigilance against it is required at any point in time, and not all can be masters of their own nature." "I do not deny that," Lady Zaradnik said. "I am just pointing out that you are using fireballs to prune your vineyards." "How does the Empire balance these issues while they wait for new people to fill administrative positions?" Countess Corlin asked. "The usual ways," Frian answered. "Minus the geld for the annual war with Reastis, of course. The nobility does not have the strength to stand in direct challenge to the Emperor, but they can still accumulate enough influence and wealth to make small strides in the political arena. This is generally in the form of competing for imperial favor, so the Emperor is free to pick and choose who rises and who falls." Despite all of the reforms that the Empire had undergone, this was one aspect of life that never seemed to change. No matter the excellence or background of those selected to lead the Empire and work in the imperial administration, ambitious individuals willing to play the games of power always appeared. "The reorganization of the Imperial Army seems to be a change in which many can find common cause," Lady Zaradnik said. "Its effects appear to be widespread and are apparent enough to everyone. Directives from the royal court of the Sorceress Kingdom do not pose any problems on the political end of things," Frian told her. "In fact, they are the least likely to result in any sort of resistance. I think it's gotten to the point where His Imperial Majesty offers to redirect any complaints to the royal court of the Sorceress Kingdom and everyone simply shuts up and works." Frian smiled slightly at the memory of her cousin telling that to the court council for the first time. The four nobles from the Sorceress Kingdom, however, frowned. "I don't understand," Lady Gonye said. "We occasionally interact with members of the royal court. They aren't unreasonable people. We even speak with the Sorcerer King once in a while. While he must of course act as a sovereign, he is personally very nice." Was this a joke? Or was it a trap? No matter how hard Frian thought about it, she couldn't figure out where any response she could render might lead. "From our perspective," Frian replied, "it is very difficult to discern the disposition of a foreign court. All we have are the accounts from the Imperial Army and, as was mentioned, cultural reactions are not so easily amended. The Sorceress Kingdom's patience in these matters is greatly appreciated." "That Gushmund is pretty good," Liane said. "She regains her balance very quickly," Florine agreed. After a rather uneventful tour of the first-class district's residential areas, they returned to the Mithril market late in the afternoon. As soon as Lady Frian and Miss Eriks boarded the carriage they had taken to the market district and disappeared from view, Liane nearly disappeared herself. Their inquisitive friend led them off on their first foray into the central markets, wandering around the sprawl of stalls and storefronts near their accommodations. With it being their first full day in the city, they had mostly wandered about curiously with few purchases made. Of the attainted, they saw little, though it may have been due to the increased presence of First Legion patrols with the coming of evening. They returned to their suite near midnight, settling down for a late meal. It was more for enjoyment due to their rings of sustenance, and they would most likely lounge about rather than retire to their beds. "She's too wary of us," Ludmilla said. Miss Eric's was far more pleasant to interact with. It can't be helped, Clara idly pushed a roasted wedge of potato around her plate. Even if we say that we're here for personal reasons, the fact that we're from the Sorceress Kingdom overshadows everything else. Given her official position and station as a duke's daughter, she probably feels obliged to act as a representative of both the court council and the imperial dynasty. That is a given, Ludmilla replied, but she should be more open with us. We're not monsters waiting to eat her the moment she lets down her guard. If she keeps on like this, never mind having bags under her eyes, she's going to collapse. They had purposely broken through Lady Freyanne's defenses multiple times to demonstrate that they harbored no ill intentions. However, no matter what aspects of themselves they presented, no matter their overtures expressing a desire for her to relax and enjoy her time together with them, Lady Freyanne remained distant and guarded. Miss Eric's, however, was more than happy to chat amicably with them, eager to exchange information and learn more about the Sorcerer's Kingdom. Well, it's her loss, Leanne said as she tinkered with one of her purchases. Dimmer Ear got to take home my copy of Dreams of Red first. You weren't supposed to let her take it, Florine frowned. You were supposed to help me edit. I did. That's the 5th draft. It's in that form because it's basically done and you're looking for feedback, right? You worry like this every time you're about to release a new volume, Miss Dreamer. Besides, it's a powerful weapon in that girl's hands. Ludmilla enjoyed the story as much as anyone else, but she couldn't see how it could be employed as a weapon. She was mildly surprised upon learning that Florine was the mysterious author of the story, then promptly wrangled into becoming one of the editors for the work. Clara had been as well, and Elishnish, somehow. I hope we get it back, Florine moped. Dimir seems to know what she's doing, but things can still happen. Well, I believe in her, Leanne said. We need to give our future Imperial Ambassador as much clout as possible. If she gets raised to Countess, Ludmilla said, she'll have as much clout as she needs. Not that she needed any. The Empire was a place where it was believed that people were the product of their own merits. Just as they believed that the impoverished deserved everything that happened to them, a countess that served as the head of an embassy must surely be there because she was eminently qualified for the position. That's not the concern here, Clara told her. We're working together with Lady Freyanne to ensure that Dimir secures the position. The fact that the Empire does not yet have a diplomatic mission to the Sorceress Kingdom means that no one of sufficient quality desires this duty. This also means that the first person who qualifies has a good chance of being selected, and Lady Freyanne is trying to make sure that it isn't some problematic individual. Then make an official endorsement, Ludmilla said. You heard Lady Freyanne, no one in the Empire dares to challenge the will of their suzerain. That will only hurt Dimir, Clara said. Even the Emperor will only make appointments based on sufficient personal merit. If she becomes an ambassador due to an endorsement by the Sorceress Kingdom, she will be considered the pet of a foreign power. She needs to be the Empire's ambassador to the Sorceress Kingdom, someone who is seen as presenting its interests on their behalf. And how does giving her a book do anything to help? As Leanne said, it's a powerful weapon. One that appears harmless, yet opens many doors. Those who receive her will not be doing so out of political interest, so she's unlikely to be seen as making moves in their games of power. Yet, it is exposure nonetheless. She will use it to be seen by the right people, and that recognition will help her get to where she needs to be. Ludmilla looked around the table. Leanne and Florine did not appear to disagree with the explanation. She eyed the youngest member of their group suspiciously. Don't tell me you planned everything this far in advance, Florine. Florine seemed taken aback at the very idea. Her amber eyes grew wide with her denial. What? No. It's just a coincidence. I had no idea my stupid story would become so absurdly popular. It's not a stupid story, Ludmilla said. You had some strange ideas about Ludwig early on, but it has become much more authentic now. Yes, well, I have you to thank for that. At any rate, how long does everyone think it will take for Dimir to show up in Erantle? Lady Freyanne picked her out, Clara said, so that should mean she has the endorsement of the Imperial dynasty. She was surprised that we moved so quickly, but it should also give them the confidence that the appointment will work out. Quickly was a gross understatement. Ambassadors and high nobles were not made 5 minutes after picking someone up in a carriage. Anyone would be shocked witless with how fast Clara could close in for the figurative kill. Are we sure that it will work? Ludmilla asked. We don't have any guarantee that the royal court will accept the appointment so easily. Lady Freyanne wouldn't have put forward an incompetent official, Clara answered. On our end, it is a matter of legitimacy and prestige. Every embassy in Erantle is a symbol of international recognition. His Majesty's court will not refuse, as the existence of foreign embassies reflects positively on the dignity of our sovereign and his state. This, in turn, helps to project our policies over the region. Their late dinner moved on to dessert, though they moved to the suite's living room. The market crossroads was still brightly lit, but not many people remained at the late hour. Members of the First Legion could be seen slowly moving through the area, inspecting the promenade after its busy day. Ludmilla frowned as she watched Leanne sit down on the floor and continued to tinker. Is that a magic item? Aha. I hope you're not trying to take it apart. Why? The last I heard of someone tampering with a magical device from the Empire, they exploded. Leanne's hands stopped. As in they exploded or the item exploded? The item, Ludmilla replied. It had some sort of secondary enchantment to prevent people from figuring out how to make them. The explosion destroyed half of a warehouse. Rose came over and snatched the magic item away from Leanne. Leanne reached out to pick up her infinite haversack lying nearby, pulling out the binder from the previous day. Florine came over and sat down beside her and they started flipping through the pages with intense expressions. I don't see why you're in such a hurry to have children, Ludmilla said. Things aren't the same as before. Because it's normal? Leanne murmured. Most people have kids around this age. We aren't most people. As you already realize, illness and injury are no longer a factor. Even the dead can be restored to life. There is simply no need to have children so early any longer. We still have much to learn about everything, Clara added. Not to mention we're busy. It might have been a good time to visit the Empire, but finding a consort merely marks the beginning of family life. We have so much to do ahead of us that I don't think it's wise to divide our attention between professional duties and maternal ones. Leanne shifted back to lean on the couch behind her. She eyed the binder near her feet and sighed. There won't be an end to busy, she told them. Everything we do just gets bigger and bigger. We've distinguished ourselves in the eyes of the royal court and that means they expect more. The world is changing, Clara, and we're right at the forefront of that change. Ludmilla said that things aren't the same as before, that includes the type of life nobles usually lead. We'll be constantly trying to fix things or make things work or get called to do stuff. Before you know it, we'll all be as old as Countess Jesn. Except for Ludmilla, Florine noted. Right. Do you think Lady Sheltier will let you grow old? Her friends turned to look at her. You mean she's going to turn us into vampires? Florine asked. I don't know, Ludmilla answered. But it is something you should keep in mind. Lady Sheltier will not so easily allow valuable vassals to grow old and die. To be frank, she enjoys the company of beautiful young women, so I doubt you'll reach 20 before immortality is offered to you. A long silence filled the air of the lounge. Ludmilla had, of course, already shared this possibility with Clara. She didn't exactly seem surprised and was more excited at the prospect of spending eternity together with Ludmilla than worried about the realities of that same eternity. Is that what happened to you? No, Ludmilla shook her head at Leanne's question. What happened to me was entirely unexpected, but Lady Sheltier's willingness to offer immortality to us came up in discussion before that. Will we still be human? I have no idea, Ludmilla said. I only know that there are many options. If we don't remain human, Leanne said, that effectively gives us until 20 to have kids. Or less. That should make finding consorts even more important. Not necessarily. Leanne turned her attention to Clara. What do you mean? It more likely means that we have an eternity to find the right consort, Clara said. I know for a fact that we all desire partners of proven talent and capability to father our children. Following Ludmilla's logic, the Sorceress Kingdom will offer such individuals immortality as well. You know, this discussion is getting really weird. We left normal behind when we became nobles of the Sorceress Kingdom. So we work really hard, become immortal, then wait for some guy to work really hard and become immortal too. Then we have kids. But, since we're immortal, we can have a bazillion kids. Do you want kids that much? Just saying. Leanne crawled forward to shut the binder and put it away. So does that mean we'll all end up as one big family? Florine asked. Our preferences overlap heavily, especially between Leanne, Clara and me. Probably not in that sense, Ludmilla said. Lady Shaltier mentioned it being a process where they needed to figure out what species would best fit us. Our liege's personal preferences for us will factor into this decision, as well. Okay, I think it's clear to all of us that Lady Shaltier is like that when it comes to women like us, Leanne said, but the way things are going it feels like we're going to end up in her personal harem. I can tell you right now that Ludmilla and I aren't gonna look great in those vampire bride outfits. I don't think she'll be dressing us up as vampire brides, Ludmilla frowned at the mental image. But it's safe to assume that we will be serving Lady Shaltier in whatever capacity she desires of us. Such things are not outside the realm of expectation when serving in the court of a powerful liege, yes? This was especially true with a large gap in social standing. Though it was not inevitable, daughters of minor houses like themselves were keenly aware of the possibility. From a purely objective standpoint, however, the benefits of joining Lady Shaltier's court far outweighed everything else. Lady Shaltier did not choose us to specifically be her playthings, Ludmilla told them. We were chosen because we are valued for our capabilities. Though she will partake of us for her pleasure, we're not going to be cloistered away in some secluded harem. The vast majority of our time will be spent doing what we do best. Lady Shaltier's duties to His Majesty stand far above all else in her estimation. Our duty is to assist her in those duties. Leanne's fingers drummed over the plush rug in the wake of her words. Everything was an expectation that she probably held, but hearing it from someone who had already been Lady Shaltier's vassal for half a year likely made the future that lay before her far more real. Florine shared a long look with Leanne. It's what you wanted the most, isn't it? Florine said, you can be together with us forever, and being able to see all of one's hard work come to fruition is something that every noble desires. You don't have any problems with this? Not knowing what lies in store is a bit frightening, Florine replied, but that's always how it is. All things considered, I don't think it's a terrible arrangement. Tell me that after you get turned into a real boob demon, Leanne muttered. Though she said so, most of Leanne's resistance seemed to have dissipated. She drew her knees up to her chin, hugging them tightly while she stared at nothing in particular. We still have dinner, she said. Dinner? Ludmilla furrowed her brow. I contacted Lord Anok's sister, the one that I'm acquainted with. She was all up for it. When in the world did you manage to do that? While we were in the first-class district today. I had my footman hop off to deliver a message. She happened to be in the city for an unrelated visit, so I thought why not? A shimmering crest of Glacier's fair. A band of moor and meadow green. A gown of verdant forest where lush bounty thrives, by sight unseen. A caravan of 4 wagons slowly made their way north along the Imperial Highway. To the west, looming over the forested expanse of the Empire's western frontier, the icy peaks of the Azalizia Mountains dominated the horizon. The brisk winter wind blew over them, but its chill was warded off by Nemel's equipment. She smiled as they strolled along, basking in the strains of the beautiful melody. He's singing it wrong, Dame Verilyn muttered. Nemel blinked at the statement from the frost dragon-turned elf beside her. Then she looked over her shoulder towards the bard performing the piece 2 wagons behind them. Proper songs require tremendous skill to perform. Many argued it was far harder to learn than magic, which Nemel did not disagree with. Beyond songs for entertainment, spell songs were in a realm of their own and Nemel was not aware of any bard who could perform them in such a way that they conveyed recognizable music. It doesn't sound too off to me, Nemel said. He's good enough to earn his keep in the second-class districts of our winter. Dame Verilyn made a disgruntled face. If it was anyone else, Nemel would have thought them filled with empty conceit. Everyone knew how difficult real music was to perform. Those who were critical of a few errors were considered boorish and unappreciative. The woman no, dragon, did female dragons refer to themselves as women? At any rate, she was undoubtedly skilled enough to dominate the entertainment scene in the imperial capital. That's the worst part, Dame Verilyn grumbled. He's getting paid to perform a cheap knockoff. A cheap knockoff, have you heard the original? The song was not one that Nemel had known of before setting off north out of Ingelfort with Dame Verilyn. According to the bard currently performing the song, it was something that had emerged over the summer from some unknown source. Saying so was nothing new, Common bards seldom claimed to have composed any song. This was not out of any form of humility. It was said that for a piece to be rendered perfectly, one would have to be the composer, as only they understood the very essence of the music they had created. Even if a conventional song could be understood by its listeners, and even if a spell song's magic took effect, they were merely imitations that would invariably have flaws because a piece of the music was missing. There are two versions, Dame Verilyn told her. One was composed for conventional performance. The other is the true song, what you call a spell song. Wow, Nemel looked up at her. I can't believe you've heard a song from its original composer before. I wonder what it was like. Would you like to hear it? Dame Verilyn asked. Zusharu thinks this is a bad idea. Nemel and Dame Verilyn looked towards the rat man waddling in front of them. Why do you say that? Nemel frowned. Zusharu has heard this song before. Zusharu went to a cold and bright place with big sky and many trees. When Zusharu returned to Zusharu, our wagon had gone from one town to the next. What? Must hear to understand. Zusharu does not recommend. You must be my only critic, Dame Verilyn huffed. Zusharu shook his head and his bluish fur fluffed out as he shuddered. Nemel looked down at the back of his head. Only the wealthy could afford to attend original performances in our winter. Even one song cost enough to make a year of her salary vanish, so he should be grateful that. Wait a minute, does that mean you composed this song, Dame Verilyn? Yes? And I don't get a single copper coin from all of these people reproducing my work, poorly, might I add. Aren't you happy that your music is spreading? Of course I am, Dame Verilyn replied, but this and that are two entirely separate things. A gust of wind filled the air with the rustling of branches and the rasp of dead leaves. Nemel eyed a nearby copse of trees suspiciously. Not only had she experienced what a ground patrol was like during her promotional examination, but members of each part of the highway patrol trained together to familiarize themselves with each other's operating procedures. That being said, she was hardly an expert at identifying potential problems along the highway. Each ground patrol had two scouts, either rogues or rangers, depending on the circumstances, who usually identified and located potential threats well in advance. No local patrols had attached themselves to their small caravan, and it didn't appear that they had hired any merchant guards. This was nice, since it meant there was no chance that they had picked up any agents sent by other factions for Dame Verilyn. As a mage, however, the apparent ease by which an attack might reach her made her feel exposed and vulnerable. Dame Verilyn, she said, is there anything in those trees over there? There are plenty of things in those trees over there. I mean things that might jump out and attack us. Not that I've noticed, Dame Verilyn replied. Have there been attacks along this highway recently? Nemel thought back over the past few weeks of highway patrols. The most exciting event that she could recall was responding to the sightings of a pack of saber wolves, which they never found. According to the other members of her unit, threats from the forests to the west of the highway were once fairly frequent. After the Sorceress Kingdom appeared out of nowhere, however, demi-human raids and monster attacks dropped to nothing. Hungry animals come out sometimes, Nemel said. Or ones that wandered out of their territory. Magical beasts appear very rarely. Oh, that sounds promising, Dame Verilyn brightened. How does that sound promising? They can all be processed for materials, yes? A pack of ravenous animals coming after us would be like gold coins conveniently flinging themselves in our direction. I hope some winter wolves come after us. The last one I sold was worth a pretty sum. A pack of winter wolves could overwhelm an entire veteran night patrol in seconds. They were magical beasts that could give parties of gold-ranked adventurers problems. She glanced around at the members of the caravan nearby, but they seemed unperturbed by Dame Verilyn's hopeful words. Did they all know what she was? Nemel turned to address Curtis, the lead wagon's driver. Do you usually travel without an escort? She asked. We usually have 2 merchant guards for each wagon, Curtis answered. The people in charge said that we didn't need them this time around since we have Dame Verilyn with us. I see, you were already acquainted with Dame Verilyn before this trip, then? Nope. We were told someone was coming, but she only appeared just before we left. Before she showed up, we were pretty dubious about having a single escort, but, well, company orders. She was loosely aware that this was how merchant companies worked. Every leg of a caravan's journey was carefully calculated by an office to maximize profit, and security arrangements were similarly calculated according to the risks. Adventurer commissions worked in much the same way. The local administration had a budget to allocate to threats that the Imperial Army couldn't handle, and rewards were effectively a percentage of the economic damage prevented by eliminating them. This made adventurers an extremely efficient way to provide security against powerful threats, but unreliable when it came to weak ones. An Orichalcum rank adventurer was as strong as a small army and cost the nation less to deploy. Having one maintain security like a small army could, however, was impossible since they were only one person. Constant vigilance against the commonly found weak threats from untamed lands was required, and the Imperial Army was the most reliable way to secure the lands against them. The effectiveness of large numbers also applied with escort work. Dame Verilyn was a frost dragon and Nemel did not doubt that she could prevail against almost anything, but there was a world of difference between being able to win a fight and being able to ensure that a caravan survived with its members unharmed and goods intact. It usually required coverage from multiple individuals and a wide range of expertise in an escort's members. "You're not worried anymore?" "Not really," Curtis shifted in his seat. "She's a knight of House Saradnik, and that's about as good as it gets without bringing Death Knights and Solitas along. I guess there are some things that can happen, but it's nothing that a regular escort would be able to stop anyway." "Such as?" "Old Blister coming out and turning us into a snack," Curtis said. "But that's not likely to happen. Aside from that, there are manticores in the foothills." "I wouldn't worry about manticores," Dame Verilyn said. "As for anything else along those lines, I noticed some hill giants." Nemel whipped her head back around to stare wide-eyed at Dame Verilyn. "Why didn't you say anything? Was I required to say something?" "It's a hill giant." "Hill giants. Plural." As far as Nemel could see, there were no hill giants in the rolling fields along the highway. "You're looking in the wrong direction," Dame Verilyn said. "I scented them 2 days ago, but that horrible odor of theirs is no longer on the wind. We've been going northwest, so that should mean that they're in or around that forest to the east of us." They had already left the jurisdiction of Ingelfort's patrols, so Nemel wasn't familiar with the surroundings. She knew that the forest existed, as one could see it from the air, but policing threats in that part of the Empire was the Second Legion's responsibility. "Maybe I should contact the Second Legion about this." "Why?" Dame Verilyn asked. "Because they're hill giants." "Repeating the same words does not make them any more or less meaningful to me," Dame Verilyn frowned down at her. "Or are hill giants simply not permitted to exist?" Curtis cleared his throat. "No offense to Officer Gran here," he said. "But people from the Empire tend to think like that. Bring her to Carnassus and she'll be jumping left and right at everything. Baharuth is a human country and their views are, well, human." "You're human, too," Nemel muttered. "Sure am," Curtis said. "But I've been around. Every race can see every other race as dangerous if they want. Way out on the other side of the Great Steppe, they consider humans dangerous." "What?" Nemel exclaimed. "How are humans dangerous?" "We don't have big teeth or sharp claws or weird abilities." "Because humans are weak and cause problems easily," Curtis replied. "The citizens of the Empire are a prime example of that. Being weak means you're unreliable and prone to seeing everything as a threat. Since you think that way, the first thing that always comes to mind is fighting, running or figuring out how to win. That wasn't fair. Humans were weak compared to other races. What else were they supposed to think?" "Master Shrew," Curtis said. Think you can win in a fight against Officer Gran here?" "Yes." There wasn't even a moment's hesitation. Though Zushiru and his apprentices often bumbled around in their quaint little way, she had seen them foraging around the one time they had to camp outside. After a while, they came back to eat with everyone, except they were eating rocks. Rocks. They could probably bite off her arm in a single chomp or shred her to pieces with their wicked claws. "Well then," Curtis said, "since you can beat her up, maybe you should." Nemel stepped closer to Dame Verilyn. Zushiru looked up at the driver, nose twitching in his direction. "But why?" "See?" Curtis gestured towards Zushiru with his chin. "That's the normal response. Most demi-humans don't walk around looking at every human thinking what a tasty morsel she seems." "Our citizens are threatened by demi-humans all the time," Nemel noted. Not a day goes by where Imperial patrols aren't fighting tribes somewhere. My caravans have been attacked by demi-humans once or twice, too, Curtis said, but never in a city or a market. How should I put it? The world works different. Human nations make rules for humans and the world out there has rules just the same. Everyone wants to live, most people need to eat to live. But, just like us, they'd usually do it in the ways that cost them the least. Even the tribes in these parts follow those basic rules. If they attack, it's because they think it's worth it or they think they can't afford not to. Kicking a pebble down the road, Nemel watched it bounce off into the ditch. Was it because they were from the Sorceress Kingdom? No, they were subjects of Reestize less than a year ago. People didn't change so easily. How could he think the way he did even after being attacked? It's not just food, Dame Verilyn said. Humans are not the only species that places value on various things. Yup, that's true, Curtis nodded. The more civilized a place gets, the more likely you'll run into people that'll come after you for your stuff. That's what we got attacked by. Bandits. Not human bandits, but bandits nonetheless. Still the same idea, though. If it's worth doing, then some people will try. And we're just supposed to accept that? Nemel said, it's fine because they want to eat us or rob us? I didn't say it's fine, Curtis replied. Just saying that's how the world works. If you need to fight, you fight. If you don't, you don't. Most races get that, but humans, nope. Humans are seen as trouble because most think they need to fight everything they can't control, and everything they do feels like it has to do with it. Reestize is even worse than the Empire, though. They think the same way and they act like they're the center of the world. Nemel shook her head. The way he spoke made it sound like humans were the bad guys, that being weak was their problem and trying to do something about it was also a problem. Perhaps you need to experience it yourself, Dame Verilyn said. It's much easier for me to learn things that way, at any rate. More to the point, I do not think your current views will get you very far in the Sorcerer's Kingdom. What do you mean? Nemel asked. You just want me to grow potatoes, right? Potatoes don't hurt anyone. They aren't like tomatoes. But you'll not grow potatoes on your own, yes? It requires farmers or some such. Sure, Nemel replied, but that only means I have to sign up some farmers. Ah, but therein lies the problem, Dame Verilyn told her. Humans are rather scarce around my territory. Your most likely candidates for tenancy are goblins.